After the arduous development and successful launch of Resident Evil 2, an idea of making a sort of Resident Evil universe was coming to fruition at Capcom, being written and organized by Flagship, a writing company made in collaboration between both Capcom supervisor Yoshiki Okamoto and Resident Evil 2's writer Noboru Sugimura, as a means to centralize the lore and plot of the series, not only wanting there to be a regular linear story moving forward, but many side stories that would contribute to a greater narrative, thus leading Capcom to want to develop 3 Resident Evil games simultaneously following the launch of 2. One project was to be the true sequel called Resident Evil 3, directed by Resident Evil 2's director Hideki Kamiya. This would take place on a boat with the protagonist from Resident Evil 2's extra scenario, the 4th survivor, bringing the G-Virus back to Umbrella HQ. Another was a Nintendo 64 exclusive to serve as a prequel called Resident Evil 0 that would feature Rebecca Chambers from Resident Evil 1 as its protagonist, whereby it would take place on a train to start. And a third, which was to serve as a slight prequel and sequel to Resident Evil 2 called Resident Evil 1.9/2.1, whereby it would explore Raccoon City during the zombie outbreak and involve a short time skip in between, utilizing a new unnamed protagonist at the time. Meanwhile, much like Resident Evil 1, Capcom wanted Resident Evil 2 to be ported to the Sega Saturn. Resident Evil 1 was already troublesome to port to that console, as the Saturn was a weaker console next to the PlayStation, and it was gonna be the case here too, except it was just not doable. Series creator and producer Shinji Mikami and his team concluded that Sega Saturn version would require too much to be cut out for it to even be possible. As a result, the port was cancelled. However, as this was something for the newly installed Saturn fans that came in with the first game, Capcom executives asked Shinji Mikami to make something for them. Anything. Of course, with the team already stretched rather thin, with now a 4th game added to that list, Mikami wanted more time for them to build the Sentry. Capcom agreed, on the condition that they would need for it to be a technological marvel. With the Saturn already pushing Resident Evil games to their limit, Mikami saw that Sega was launching a new console, a next-generation console called the Sega Dreamcast. The first 128-bit console that not only would be able to do anything Resident Evil has done prior, but become one that would even start resembling Resident Evil 2's FMV cutscenes, a new side entry called Code Veronica. Through changing protagonists, evolving designs, and many cut ideas, today in the first of 2 parts, we shall explore the history and beta unused content of Resident Evil Code Veronica. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the subscribe button, hit the like button too, to further support us and keep creating new videos. It was the spring of 1998, and the story for this new Resident Evil side entry was about to begin. The game was being directed by Resident Evil 1 system planner Hiroki Kato. Together with writer Noboru Sugimura, they wrote the story and characters for this game. While Resident Evil had 2 new protagonists in the previous game, an idea was made this time to return back to the original pair, Jill Valentine and Chris Redfield. The story of this game follows the diary entry found in Resident Evil 2 written by Chris Redfield, where Chris, Jill, and Barry were to go to the main headquarters of the Umbrella Corporation in Europe in order to investigate their work on viruses that led to the outbreaks in the mansion and the entire city. The idea of the game taking place in Europe was a departure for the series, as it was always one designed to have an American feel to them. As a result, the game was to feature many more classic European designs, including Gothic architecture, German weaponry, and even Central European carvings. Meanwhile, the story being told like a lullaby, rather than in the usual American horror film style the series is known for. With the story written, producer Shinji Mikami decided to split the art team up based on their particular interests. Certain ones were going to be on environmental duty, which for their task were sent abroad to photograph European houses and castles for research. Others, such as Flagship's artist Satoshi Nakai, were on character design, and so the story and characters were well underway by this crew. the de facto protagonist was to be Jill Valentine, who, while resembling her Resident Evil 1 self quite a bit, with her star uniform being there, had key differences including more combat-heavy boots accompanied with a hidden blade, along with heavier tactical gloves, while lacking the shoulder pads and beret from the first game. Interestingly now, with shorter hair, looking quite a bit more battle-hardened after facing that hellish mansion. Meanwhile, the secondary protagonist, Chris Redfield, complimented Jill in this regard, having an outfit that also resembled his Resident Evil 1 uniform, but with some key differences too, lacking an undershirt, but with a heavier vest. Overall, both look ready for a covert STARS operation in Umbrella HQ. The game was to lead the pair to uncover the secrets of Umbrella, leading to the antagonists of the game, which were Hilbert and Hilda Gruger, both being children of a former Nazi officer who fled after World War II on a U-boat, now a family that worked with Umbrella. A common trope in media whereby Nazi experimentation is carried over into the modern age, and here the pair were working with a new experimental virus called the T. Veronica. They were to also be accompanied by their butler, who fought alongside their father in the war, both Hilbert and the butler very much wearing a Nazi officer-styled uniform too. Meanwhile, like with other Resident Evil games, this was to also have its own tyrant, this one resembling the likes of Mr. X, by wearing the bottom half of his coat, meanwhile at the same time being more robotic and thus coming with a mechanical heart and a breathing tube. All the while, the team wished to reintroduce the original villain of the series into this game too, Albert Wesker. Wesker was presumed dead as of the end of Resident Evil 1, but the writer of that game, Kenichi Iwao, had always planned it whereby his death was to be ambiguous and would return down the road. This time he was presented as an independent agent for a new organization called HCF, a competitor to Umbrella, and would be arriving there to get a sample of the T. Veronica that the Grugers were making. Much like Jill and Chris, he also heavily resembled his Resident Evil 1 appearance, but the major difference lied in his uniform now being black and sporting the HCF logo as opposed to stars. These, along with a cast of supporting characters that would accompany the protagonist, including Umbrella's security guard Rodrigo and a mysterious young man named Steve. While planning was well underway, during mid-1998, things were about to be shaken up quite a bit with the other side projects. Hideki Kamiya's Resident Evil 3 was pushed to the PlayStation 2, rebooted and needed more time to be worked on, and so was now rebranded to Resident Evil 4. Meanwhile, Resident Evil 1.9/2.1, which was the closest to being completed, was now being rebranded as Resident Evil 3 to fill that void between Resident Evil 2 and 4. However, not wanting to use a fresh protagonist for this, they wanted a character that was already familiar to the series. Seeing as how the game takes place during Resident Evil 2's events, only Resident Evil 1 characters were an option, but both Chris and Jill were already being used for Code Veronica. However, writer Noboru Sugimura soon noticed that the original ending he had planned for Resident Evil 2 had been slightly changed by Hideki Kamiya, whereby the dialogue by Claire Redfield and Leon Kennedy made it sound like they would be back soon.
It's up to us to take out Umbrella.
And so an idea of a swap came, whereby the idea of Claire Redfield wanting to look for her brother Chris Redfield would be utilized for the story of Code Veronica. Claire would as such take the place of Jill in Code Veronica to do just that, and so freeing up Jill to be reutilized in the new Resident Evil 3. With that, the story of Code Veronica was now being reworked. While it followed what Chris's diary mentioned, which was Chris and the company going to Europe, this time Claire goes there after the fact to find her brother. While that was the major plot change for the protagonist, another major change comes in the form of the antagonist, the Gruger family. As they are a Nazi-associated family, Capcom started to worry about the reception of these characters in Europe and how it would impact the sale of the game. As such, the characters were rewritten to become British and with the surname of Ashford. Hilbert Gruger became Alfred Ashford, who, while he had a rather Nazi-influenced uniform, was toned down to have a more British officer's uniform, which even that was changed to look more like a former British military redcoat, removing any aspect of modern military association. Meanwhile, the butler was removed altogether and only ever mentioned in a single letter you find of him in-game. Hildegruger, however, became Alexia Ashford, a character that would become the central tyrant of the game, having been injected with the T. Veronica virus. But in building the villains of the game, they had to start toning down Alexia, the final boss's appearance, for at least two of her forms. Her first form was designed to have nipples originally. Meanwhile, her second form looked more Yannick. Likely with the worry of rating boards, these had to be toned down. Meanwhile, several other characters saw their designs updated, Chris Redfield finally receiving an undershirt as he well needed, Rodrigo getting more simplified appearance and swapping ethnicities. Meanwhile, Steve was completely redone to have a more casual appearance to him, while the tyrant himself was simplified to remove any mechanical bits and clothing, given a more Resident Evil 1 style naked look. As well, zombies were set to return as per normal with various designs made. However, a special breed was also being designed called the Contamination Monster, where it would have a huge sack between its legs, something that was quickly abandoned once ready to develop the game. Being mid-1998, Capcom's focus was mainly on getting their next big entry, Resident Evil 3, out. Already being spread thin on 4 games, there just weren't enough people to actually build from the story concepts and characters they had been making for the past year. As such, Capcom outsourced to 2 different corporations for assistance, XAX Entertainment to assist in environmental building, taking apart the concept arts and bring the horror alive, while NextSec Entertainment was to do a bulk of the technical development, altogether having a crew of 70 people on this game. Utilizing the power of the Dreamcast, models were given a high polygon count, especially in cutscenes at a strong 2500 polygons, giving full clarity and expression to characters much as what the FMV cutscenes were once used for, even going as to give animations to zombies, such as moving their jaws or their eyes twitching. During this stage, Claire was getting a new attire altogether. While somewhat resembling her Resident Evil 2 appearance, she'd wear a red vest instead of a jacket, along with pink pants. Odd attire, but it was definitely quite combat ready to match her brother, which was the intention as they wished to show Claire as battle hardened after gaining experience in the last game, and so environments were now being built based on the concept that the environmental artists had drawn, which were based on the photos of the European structures that they had taken. Being that this is on the Dreamcast, a chain that kept Resident Evil isolated to pre-rendered backgrounds were finally gone. This time they were faithfully recreating the concept art in full 3D, allowing for fully cinematic cutscenes without the need of FMV videos. FMV videos in this case just being left for more complex cutscenes that required a lot of detail and effects that go even beyond the Dreamcast's power. Having a few months to work on it, and building likely just a single prison area, Capcom was ready to show it off. And so the Tokyo Game Show was coming up in October 1998, but instead of it being shown there first, Sega was consolidating much of its Dreamcast library to show at its own event press show. Already having run one earlier in the year, a second Sega New Challenge Conference was happening at the same time. At this event, Supervisor Yoshiki Okamoto presented Code Veronica to the world for the first time, featuring Pink Pants Claire Redfield in the prison area. While Capcom had agreed to show it there first, as the big grand reveal for Sega's new console, it was just still a press-only release, and thus the public could not see it for themselves. But a few screenshots did come out to have the people get a taste of what was seen. As such, the true grand reveal came to the public only 3 days later at the Tokyo Game Show itself, where Capcom showed a very small trailer of the game to the public for the first time. From the get-go, we see a cutscene of Claire banging on the entrance of the prison to let her out, something that gets cut to Claire just being automatically shot at as soon as she enters that area. With how little footage is seen with how little of the game was actually done, it can clearly still be seen that the initial entrance to the hall has a very different camera angle to the final games. It may have been brief, but the public absolutely loved it. Publications such as IGN being impressed by how the days of pre-rendered backgrounds were gone, and how it was starting to resemble the CG footage of the past. This was a victory for both Capcom in getting people people excited for the next generation Resident Evil game, and Sega for how powerful its machine was. With confidence around the game built up, the game's development continued, this time on building the rest of the game's environments with how impressive it was to the public being a full 3D. Of course, being that it was being built in full 3D, lighting was more important than ever, and for a while there, the lighting was rather flat in some parts. The training facility's interiors especially being a major point of that, with a distinct bright light in comparison to how it was in the final game, where it is made a great deal darker and lit only enough to give it a creepier mood. Or by the prison, where the camera angle started out being more top-down before following Claire from behind, but overall, much was being adapted quite faithfully from the concepts that the game continues to be built on. However, soon the team had grown tired of these pink pants that Claire sported. While it isn't known much what their exact feelings are, no matter how much you look at Pink Claire, it just doesn't stack up to the design that she had in the original Resident Evil 2. And that's exactly what happened. The team just built her exact Resident Evil 2 design with no changes whatsoever, looking closely like how she did in her Resident Evil 2 FMV scenes as a result. However, she was also set to receive some battle damage in the game where her shirt gets torn here, and thus given a slightly more distinct appearance from her Resident Evil 2 model. Next time, with newfound confidence and the game now being built up decently, its true grand reveal to the general public was about to happen at E3 1999 with an aim for that Dreamcast launch that they had much hoped for. In the process, the game started to evolve drastically as it changes and grow, even Claire starting to have a new appearance altogether, let alone several ideas that started being cut due to time constraints on the project, some of which have to be eventually added in for a more robust re-release of the game on an even bigger platform. So make sure to hit the subscribe button for I plan to be back for more Resident Evil and other games gaming history and cut content soon. Hit the like button and comment below on if you would have preferred Jill over Claire as the protagonist. So everyone, thank you for watching.